Welcome to Her Story, the podcast that brings to life the stories of incredible women throughout history. Each episode uncovers the remarkable lives, achievements, and struggles of women who shaped the world, beyond the textbooks and headlines. Join us as we celebrate their legacies and inspire new generations with tales of courage, resilience, and trailblazing spirit. In today's episode, I am delighted to welcome back my dear friend and brilliant author Amanda Schiavo to discuss her novel In Her Own Right, a novel about Mary I. Amanda Schiavo is a New York City-based journalist and author. She holds a degree in history from Pace University. Her debut work of fiction, In Her Own Right, a novel of Lady Mary Tudor, tells the story of the early life of England's first Queen Regnant. The sequel, Fire and Faith, covers the tumultuous 5-year reign of Queen Mary I. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to the podcast, Amanda. How are you?
I'm so well. Thank you so much for having me again.
No, I'm absolutely delighted. Obviously, it's been, I think, over a year since you were last on the podcast, which is crazy. For anyone that's not heard our episode from last year, could you tell us, when did you first become interested in Tudor history?
Oh, sure. So I became interested in Tudor history when I was in intermediate school, so sixth, seventh, eighth grade. And my mom, who is a voracious reader, loves Shakespeare, loves history, she handed me a biography of Anne Boleyn by Carolee Erickson called Mistress Anne. And I was hooked. I was absolutely, absolutely hooked. And I actually remember going up to her being like, "What do you mean he cut off her head?" Like holding the book and like shaking it at her. She was like, "Keep going." And that's kind of where the love of Tudor history sort of sprang up. And I would just read biographies and novels and watch all the shows, the good and the bad. And with Mary in particular, it wasn't until maybe until I got into about my mid-20s, because I was definitely one of those people who was like, she's nothing but Bloody Mary, Elizabeth is the best, blah 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 blah, you know, those types. And then I actually said, let me actually look into who this woman truly, truly was. And man, is it a deep well. And there's so much more to her than Bloody Mary. And that's sort of how my focus sort of shifted, sort of from general Tudor interest into kind of a specific focus on Mary. Because even when I was in college, in order to graduate, I had to do a history thesis. And I chose to do it on the popular religious experience under Edward and then Mary. And it was kind of where the research for the books kind of began, actually.
Why did you want to write a novel about Mary?
Honestly, it came from wanting to read one about Mary. There's just not that many novels out there about her where she's the main character. I always sort of found that she was always sort of, in other novels, she was a side character, or, you know, the villain that you have to get through to get to Elizabeth. And, you know, again, there's just so much more to her than that. And it's so nice to see this change that's happening more recently with Mary. We've got a lot more novels about her. We've got a lot more balanced takes on her in media. Becoming Elizabeth, my favorite portrayal of her. So it's nice to see this switch. But yeah, my desire to write about Mary really came from just wanting to read about her.
No, I completely agree, because I think we're finally getting a bit of more nuanced portrayal of Mary. I'm obviously not going to condone what happened in her reign,
Of course.
but there is so much more to it. And obviously, as you know, I'm writing a non-fiction book about her relationship with Elizabeth, and
Mm-hmm.
she's so interesting. Like, why
Yes,
isn't she given more love?
yes, thank you. Yes. And no, of course, that's always my argument, is that and for any of them, whether we're talking about Mary, Elizabeth, Henry, anybody, we can't excuse the things that they did because they all have blood on their hands. They've all done horrible things to the innocent. It's interesting how Mary is held to a very, very different standard than, say, Elizabeth, who I think, and you're doing the research, so tell me if I'm wrong. I think her reign was pretty bloody.
No, it was like I'm not going into Elizabeth's reign as much, but she was ruthless with Catholics. Like if you actually look into it, she was ruthless.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And it's yeah. Again, and it's not about. But that doesn't mean that we can't talk about the great things that she did. And it's the same thing with Mary. I think we should be shouting from the rooftops how Mary passed the Act for Regal Authority, which is the act that gives female sovereigns the equal right to rule as men. We have, we associate. It's so interesting, and maybe this is the American perspective, but it's so interesting because we associate England with queens, and that's thanks to Mary passing that act.
How did you decide in your novel what aspects of Mary life you particularly wanted to focus on?
I wanted to tell Mary's story in two parts. I wanted to do the first book would focus on her life up until she became queen, and then the second book would focus on her reign and everything that kind of happened there. And kind of just as the story was flowing, certain elements kind of get left out. So I realized I never included Margaret Douglas in the story. I never included her fool, Jane, in the story, who she had a very close relationship with. But then I did create fictionalized characters like her best friend Margaret. And so yeah, it just kind of it was what made sense for the story. And so yeah, again, like not having Margaret in there, it just kind of made sense. It just having the fool in there just kind of didn't work with the story. And then so yeah, it just kind of the way I write, I think actually annoys a lot of people, that like editors, because I just sit down and I write. I don't outline. Even the same thing, like I'm a journalist professionally, and I don't outline my articles. I just sit down and I start writing. And I think like I've had editors telling me like, please don't do that. I'm like, nope, can't. This is just how I do it, and it's just how it flows.
How did you want Mary to be portrayed in this?
It was really important that in both books, Mary is portrayed as balanced, as a complete human. So, with Bloody Mary, the legend, there is this idea of, she's the villain, she's the evil queen, she's the tyrant, and in her own right, I really wanted people to see how she becomes quotes around the phrase Bloody Mary. I wanted them to understand her trauma. And I wanted them to kind of have these moments where they really, really sympathize with her. And then they kind of look at her like, oh, Mary, kind of tone it down. The way you would any person, the way you look at people. There's a scene in the first book that is completely fictionalized. I decided Mary was going to witness the burning of Anne Askew. Completely fictionalized. I don't even think they were in the same place when this was happening. But it made sense for the story. And in that scene, Mary is staring at Anne, and we get her sort of internal monologue, and she's thinking, I don't understand why she won't recant, why she won't take on the true faith. Why is she choosing this? Why is she choosing an eternity in hell? And she's very stoic, and she's just staring. Whereas Margaret, who's right next to her, who is a Catholic, Margaret is very Catholic. She's pro, anti-Reformation, like all that kind of thing. But she's freaking out because she's watching this happen to another human being, and she kind of looks at Mary like, what is wrong with you? Why aren't you reacting? And it was just sort of like, after everything that Mary had been through, it made sense for her to watch this thing happening and being like, well, you're choosing this, and I'm not seeing you as a person because you're it's so hard to kind of wrap our 2025 minds around what they were thinking at the time, because this is a period where your main concern is meant to be your place in heaven. And to Mary, being a heretic, which is what she sees this person as, is the worst thing that you can be. And I think that historically is a flaw in Mary's personality. She sees things as black and white, right or wrong, heresy or not, and that was it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if we look at it from a 2025 perspective, Mary was very much this is right and wrong,
Mm-hmm.
which is completely fine because I think I'm quite similar. I see things as like, well, you're either right or you're wrong. Like I
Mm-hmm.
can't sometimes see the grey area of the
Mm-hmm.
of something. So I get where Mary comes from, and I think you'll agree that a lot of why she's so fervent in her Catholicism is because of what happens to her mother.
Oh, absolutely. It's the only constant in her life. There's so much upheaval in her life. It's the only thing she really has that's steady. And she's so devoted to her mother, and her mother was so devoted to Catholicism. I mean, look at who her grandparents were. Mary's grandparents, Isabella and Ferdinand of Spain.
How did you depict Mary's relationship with her mother in this novel?
I wanted them to have. I based it a lot on my own relationship with my mom. I'm very, very lucky that I'm very, very close with my mom. We have a really great relationship. And I kind of incorporated elements of that into that relationship with Catherine and Mary. And I wanted it to be very clear that Catherine looked at her daughter as a person, whereas Henry was looking at her more as like a cute little chess piece to move around the political board. This is my pretty little princess, and don't you want to marry her and form alliances? Whereas, Catherine, who, again, daughter of Queen Isabella, looked at Mary like an actual person. This is my child, and my child has this great future ahead of her. I mean, there was never a doubt in Catherine's mind that Mary could be queen. And I think you see that a lot in the novel. And one of my favorite scenes, one of the hardest scenes to write in the first novel, and one of my favorite scenes is, and this is a spoiler if you guys haven't read it, I gave Mary and Catherine a chance to say goodbye to one another. We know historically they're separated for years. They're not allowed to write to one another. They're not allowed to communicate in any way. And I just thought, what if? What if mother and daughter got the chance to say goodbye? Even if it was just, what if there was a letter that existed that we'll never know about because it had to be burned right away? You know what I'm saying? What if? Just what if? And from a modern, taking the train kind of perspective, Kimbolton and Hatfield, where they were both staying at the time, weren't that far apart from one another that I thought, okay, if she got on a horse and rode through the night, she could probably get there by dawn. And so that's what I have happen. And she goes to Kimbolton, and she gets to say goodbye to her mother, which I just thought was something that both of them deserved.
Yeah, I really felt upset reading that because I was like, I think it's so awful what
Yeah.
happens to them
Mm-hmm.
and their relationship. Like I'm researching that at the minute,
Mm-hmm.
and sorry, I'm plugging my book at the same
No,
time as
do it.
discussing
We should
yours,
plug both.
and I'm like trying not to cry because I'm like, why were they separated right when they knew Catherine of Aragon was dying? What's Catherine of Aragon gonna plot?
Yeah.
Dying.
Just give. I mean, and Henry couldn't. I mean, everyone likes to blame Anne, but Henry couldn't give that inch.
No, and I've actually stated this in the book. Anne is blamed for this, but
Mm-hmm.
Henry signs off on it.
Mm-hmm. That's
Uh,
the thing. Nobody was going to do anything without his approval.
how did you put in the at Mary's time at Hatfield? How did you write this? Because obviously it's a hard time in Mary's
Mm-hmm.
life.
It's a lot of sort of yo-yoing in a sense in Mary's perspective, because she's like, I'm just going to have nothing to do with Elizabeth. I don't want to have anything to do with this child that's my half illegitimate sister. I don't want anything to do with her. And then she sees this little girl, this little baby, and she has these sort of moments of, it's really not her fault. She didn't ask to be born into this. And she starts to really care for Elizabeth. But, and historically, when Mary is in Elizabeth's household, there's always these fights over precedence, because Mary always said, no, I'm the princess. I am the true born one. You should be in deference to me. So there was always arguments where Mary would say, no, I'm not sitting in an inferior place. I should be at the head of the table. Or I'm not riding in this broken down carriage to the next place because I am the princess. So there were always these sort of back and forth. In reality, there were always these sort of back and forth moments like that. And I incorporate that a lot into the time in the book where Mary is in Elizabeth's household, but I also have these elements of there's moments in the book where Elizabeth just wants Mary, and that annoys the people in Elizabeth's household because they're really not supposed to be kind of dealing with Mary. She's just sort of kind of meant to be there in the background and to know her new place. But Elizabeth's like, no, I want my big sister. And Elizabeth, even then, being, the fiery little girl that she was, they all had to say, okay, fine, whatever, go get her. So it was about, and then as the story kind of goes on, and, we have the downfall of Anne Boleyn, and now they're both declared illegitimate. Mary takes more of a care of her, and she's like, okay, we're in the same boat. And then they both get restored to the line of succession. And Mary's like, I don't understand. Elizabeth doesn't really need a place in the line of succession. So there's a lot of back and forth, which I think, and we can never know what was going on in somebody's head, but I think that might be true to what Mary was experiencing. I mean, as she got older and became sort of more like her mother, I think Mary really couldn't forgive Elizabeth for being Anne's child. But when she was young and when she was innocent, I think Mary really did look at her in that way. So it was about finding that balance, those moments of, I just love my sister, and those moments of, this stranger who's taking my place. So about there's a lot of finding the balance. And that's really what I wanted Mary to be. I wanted her to be balanced. I wanted you to have sympathy for her. I wanted you to roll your eyes at her the way you would anybody else.
No, I get that because I think Mary didn't want to give up that kind of prestige because obviously
Mm-hmm.
she, in her mind, she is and she was the
Mm-hmm.
Princess of England. And I think Elizabeth was also kind of similar in the same way, well, I am princess. I am
Mm-hmm.
also the king's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to also make room for me too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Did you want this novel to be completely sympathetic, or did you want us just to look at Mary's story more nuanced?
More nuanced. I really wanted to be more nuanced. I did want you to have sympathy for her, but it wasn't meant to be a I'm Mary, woe is me. I really, really hoped that people could see what she was going through and then see and kind of go, oh, that's where Bloody Mary came from. Even though I really I hate Bloody Mary. But you can kind of sit there and you go, oh, I get it, because we've all experienced trauma, and we've all had negative reactions to trauma and extreme reactions to trauma. And it sounds almost a little glib to say it like that, but that's what was happening to Mary. It was reactions to trauma, and then you throw in this unwavering belief in God and what he wants and what is supposed to be. And again, going black and white, right or wrong, it really makes for some volatile personalities in adulthood.
How much research did you have to do for this novel?
It's interesting. I feel like I've been researching this novel forever. I really feel like, since I was a kid, I've been researching this novel. When I sat down to start writing, I had a lot of the information in my head already, just from what I studied in college, what I like to read in my spare time. So what I did was I went and I got just a bunch of different biographies of Mary. And Anna Whitelock's biography of Mary was like my Bible for the research process. And just kind of going back and then having to look into things a little bit more deeper, like certain laws under the different, tutors and laws that came before. And just kind of broadening my knowledge around those sort of things, those kind of elements that like you kind of not really pay close attention to when you're just reading a biography for fun, going back into that and looking into the archives and, online. And again, relying on like scholarly articles and things like that. So for Mary, it was a mix of having a lot of the information in my head, and then it's fiction. So I get to craft a story around what I already knew and then going a little bit. I'm one of these people, I like my historical fiction to be historically accurate. So I wanted to incorporate as much truth as I could. And actually, in the sequel, there's a scene where Mary's having a conversation about a bunch of different trade acts that she wants passed, and I'm like, I think people are going to either really find this interesting or be so bored. But I was like, you know what, it's going in the book. And just to kind of give an idea of what she actually did, because these are acts meant to support the poor.
I mean, that's music to my ears. Historical fiction, but it's also accurate. That's all
Mm-hmm.
we want in life. It's
Yes.
historians.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Finally, because if I do like Becoming Elizabeth, but
Mm-hmm.
I only like Mary in it. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
The rest I don't
No, same,
enjoy.
same.
I need a film. Well, they are doing a film. We've seen that they're
They
doing
are
a
doing a
film
film.
as of
Yes.
yesterday. Thank you, Gareth Russell, for telling us.
Mm-hmm.
So you have told us that there's going to be a book two. What can you tell us about book two?
I'm so excited about book two. So book two is called Fire and Faith: The Reign of Queen Mary the First, and it is going to open up with Mary's first Parliament, and is going to end with the end of Mary's reign, and it is going to be just it's 9 chapters covering 5 years of her reign, and we're going to get into a lot of different things. We're going to get into what she did for the poor. We're going to get into her disastrous marriage, which I think if there was one mistake Mary made above all others, it was her marriage. Um, and we're going to actually, what I chose to do in this novel is 2 chapters are told from other characters' perspectives. So we're getting a chapter from Jane Grey's perspective, and we're getting a chapter from Elizabeth's perspective. And I just, when I was first thinking of the novel, I actually thought, do I want to do a book where I go back and forth? One chapter is Mary, one chapter is Jane Grey, and kind of have it be like this sort of battle between the two. But then I thought that the age gap between them, which is, I think it's like 20 years, kind of wouldn't work in that way. I'd be, with Mary, and then going directly into Jane, I'd be talking about things that Mary hadn't experienced yet. So I was like, you know what, that's not really going to work for me in book form. But I wanted Jane to have a voice. So I do give her a chapter. And the same thing with Elizabeth. You get her perspective on her imprisonment in the Tower. Spoilers. But that's okay. Makes you want to read it. So yeah, so I do that. 2 chapters from 2 different perspectives. And yeah, I hope we are going to have the burnings. The burnings are going to be pretty prominent part of it, because how could they not be? I mean, they happened, you know.
Well, that makes me very excited for book number two, more than I already was. So roll on next year.
Yes, May 7th, 2026.
So far away.
I know.
Was the research process for this novel very different, and was it quite hard to research for this?
This one was a little bit harder in the sense I was looking for evidence. There is an episode from Mary's reign that we all take as fact. And this episode is the execution of a woman called Parotine Macy from, I'm probably going to butcher this word. Is it Guernsey?
Guernsey, yeah.
Yes. What we know for fact is that Parotine, her mother, and her sister were accused of heresy. They were accused of not attending church. They were tried and they were burned at the stake. Fox's Book of Martyrs tells us that Parotine was so pregnant when this happened, and just like a trigger warning for people who maybe get uncomfortable hearing things about pregnancy and things like that. Just you might, yeah. The story goes that she was so pregnant that as she was bound to the pyre and the flames were consuming her, she gave birth. Good Samaritans grabbed the child, pulled him out, and a bailiff took the child from the rescuers and threw him back in. That's the story. That has a lot of bearing on Bloody Mary. And it's just widely accepted as fact. Now, it's very, very odd to me as a historian to think, one, we know that pleading your belly was a very easy way to delay your execution. Two, we know that Catholics believed in the innocence of being born. You get baptized, you wash away the original sin, and you go on and hopefully live a godly life. Three, I think it's strange that there was no sort of great outcry. I think this is a legend. I think we know that Paratine did was a martyr. I think everything else about and I'm not just saying, this is not just meant to be an opinion. This is going back to the research. I think this is a wildly apocryphal tale. And I'm still looking for evidence. I want the evidence. If somebody I and again in the group chat, I've been driving you all crazy with me and my this, I call it my history white whale. I'm looking for any kind of contemporary evidence that tells us whether or not this actually happened. And I just, from what I'm finding, or for what I'm not finding, I'm really thinking that this is just a very tall tale that has taken on a life of its own. We do also, I think something did happen. Something happened at this execution that really turned people's stomachs, because we know that Elizabeth, about 10 years later, I want to say 1568, but I'm not sure if that date is correct, she does pay restitution to Paratine's family. So something happened. We know something terrible happened. I just don't know if it's that particular gory story. And if I'm 100% wrong, I want to know. And if I'm 100% right, I want to know. But so going into that part of research was very, very hard, because it's like, there's the legend of Bloody Mary, and it's what is fact and what is fiction. And, again, wanting to keep Mary balanced, but then you're reading about these terrible things, and you're reading about them, and you're going, she wasn't lighting the pyres, but she did give the approval. And it was a lot. And again, we could say the same thing about Elizabeth, the same thing about Henry, the same thing about Edward. It's a lot of signatures on a lot of death warrants, and it's hard to, when there's no pure, it's a fictional story about real people, and there's no villain with the horns. You know what I'm saying? It's, so these are real people, and it's hard to sit there and say Mary was justified, Henry was justified, Elizabeth was just, but you can understand why they did. You don't have to like it, you can hate it, and I do. You understand why they did, and you kind of, and maybe this is a incorrect 21st century perspective, which kind of almost have to feel bad for them, because they had this very linear, very, again, going back to the black and white way of thinking. There was no wiggle room, there was no gray area. And with Mary, it's so hard, because she honestly thought she was doing what she was doing was for the good of the souls of her people. And it's like, you sit here in 2025 and you go, no. But at the time, it's so hard to reconcile their thought process with our thought process. And I think that it wasn't so much that the research maybe was harder, but maybe what I was researching, turning that into a story where the person doing these things is the main character, is the hero of the story, was I think the writing process was more difficult than the research process.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously Mary did sign warrants for people to be burnt, executed, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always found Stephen Gardner and Reginald Pole were more fervent in this than
Yes.
Mary. Am I wrong
Mm-hmm.
in saying that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think you're definitely right. I think if we took Mary out of the equation and we popped in another Catholic monarch who had those two as their advisor, I think we'd be seeing very similar stories of burnings. And it's Mary herself. What's interesting about Mary is there's actually an account, I believe it's from the Venetian ambassador, talking about how kind Mary was. And it's really interesting to kind of the real kind Mary and then Bloody Mary over here. It's so interesting. They're so wildly different. But I do think you're right. I think it was a lot to do with the people that she had surrounding her.
When Mary's queen, we see a lot of her teeth are falling out and she looks like a really old woman. Is there
Mm.
any truth in this?
The teeth thing, I haven't heard the tooth thing. I know that's a thing with Elizabeth because she had a sweet tooth. So by the time she was in her 70s, her teeth had become very rotted. What's interesting is I wonder how much negativity that is Elizabeth was kind of transferred to Mary. But towards the end of her life, Mary had a very rough final year of her life. There was a false pregnancy. She ends up losing her part of her vision at one point. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to like try and diagnose, but the way they talk about some of the symptoms, I almost wonder. I'm like, did she maybe have a stroke? Like, I don't know. It just like some of the symptoms, but yeah, the vision thing. And then in August of 1558, she gets a very bad case of influenza, and that's kind of when it really starts to go downhill. So yeah, she definitely her last year had. I think at one point, I think she was losing her hair at one point as well. But yeah, the last year of her life was pretty bleak.
How did you decide what to fictionalize in both of your novels?
It was delicate because, like I said, I'm a historian at heart, so I want my historical fiction to be historically accurate. But I'm also telling a story. So I decided that I was going to create a best friend for Mary, a fictionalized best friend who was with her through thick and thin. So that was an element that I fictionalized. I also have a fictionalized the scene where she says goodbye to her mother, totally fictionalized. The scene where she's witnessing Anne Askew's execution, completely fictionalized. But I chose to create those scenes because I thought it made sense with who Mary was as a person, and again, kind of seeing who she was and who she would grow into. But then there were also like even like little things that I wanted to keep accurate. We know this television show, The Tudors, right? And Mary is holding Jane's hand when she's giving birth. But in reality, she wouldn't have been allowed in the room because she was an unmarried woman. So in my novel, I have a scene where Mary is outside the chamber listening and praying and talking with her best friend, Margaret. So she's outside, she's not seeing everything that happens. So like little fictionalized elements with also historical accuracy thrown in. So yeah, it was really just like about the balance and what made the most sense for the story.
Is there anything you decided to keep out of your novels?
Well, I had mentioned earlier that I kind of left Margaret Douglas out. I left out her fool. I'm trying to think. There were certain things. I'm trying to think the major stuff. She was sick a lot, Mary, and I do kind of allude to that, but I don't have too many episodes in either book where she's ill. But I kind of make mention to it. She also had a lot of menstrual issues. Again, I kind of just mention it, but it didn't feel like they were things that needed big, long, scenes or explanations or things like that. So I think it was more little stuff that I chose to kind of like hit the cutting room floor.
Towards the end of the podcast, I like to ask my guests five fun history questions. So, firstly, have you got a history pet peeve?
Bloody Mary.
Mic drop.
Just mic drop. Bloody Mary. It is time to retire Bloody Mary.
If you could go back in time to any event or day in history, when would it be and why?
Hmm. That one, there's so many. There's so many. But okay, so this is not Tudor related. I am on a kick where I'm learning a lot about Caterina Sforza, the badass Italian Renaissance woman. In 1484, Caterina, she's seven and a half months pregnant, jumps on the back of a horse, rides to the Castel Sant'Angelo, gets rid of the guards that are in there, says, no, leave, you guys can leave, instills her own men into the Castel Sant'Angelo, and then aims the cannons at all of the access, because this is how you got into Rome at that point. She basically held hostage the election of a new pope until the College of Cardinals acknowledged her family's fortunes and rights. She was worried. She didn't have a very great view of her husband. She was worried that he was going to kind of just like capitulate and say, like, give up all of her children's inheritances and things like that, and just kind of, be kind of a wimp, for lack of a better term. So she was like, no, I'm going to take the Castel Sant'Angelo, hold the papacy hostage until my rights and my children's rights are secure. 7.5 months pregnant. It's an 11-day standoff. She wins. She emerges from the gates open. She emerges. She's in this brown silk gown. She's got a sword at her hips. And she walks out. She's got all these men behind her. They're her cavalry and her foot soldiers, and they're all following her out, and they escort her home to Forlì. I would love to witness that moment of her, just this 7.5-month pregnant lady who just jumped on a horse and decided to hold the papacy hostage. I would love to see her triumphant walk out.
Have you got a favorite book? It can be fiction, non-fiction, or I might let you have two.
I have a favorite book. It's a very, very odd book. It's called Hell by Robert Olen Butler, and it takes place in hell. And Anne Boleyn is a character in the book. It's this guy, he anchors the evening news in hell. It's such a whack, but like everybody's in hell. Like everybody, like anyone you can think of. The book came out in the like mid 2000s, so like anyone you could think of from that time period would be there. And he gets an assignment from the devil to go around and do these interviews. And Anne Boleyn is his girlfriend. She lives with him. They have a house together in hell. It's the funniest thing. And he's going off and doing these interviews, and he learns that Dante actually did come to hell and escape. So he's like, okay, there's an escape hatch. And so while he's doing these interviews and like setting up this documentary for the devil, he's also searching for his way to get out of hell. It's a very quick read. It's so entertaining. It's so good.
You need to send me to the link to that. I was like, I
Yes,
need to
absolutely.
read that. If you could invite any historical figure to a dinner party, who would it be and why?
That one's a good one too. Honestly, I would say Anne Boleyn, because she's where my fascination started, and there's just so many questions I would love to ask her. I would love to ask her, when she left court for that year, did she think Henry was going to leave her alone? Did she have any sympathy for Catherine after Elizabeth was born? I mean, there's just so many. Would she do it again, knowing what would happen? Knowing if she knew who Elizabeth would become, would she do it all again? There's just so many questions. And again, just her being my first foray into all of this, it would have to be her.
And finally, have you got a favorite historical fact?
Favorite historical fact? Ooh, I have to think about this one for a minute. I think I'm going to say the fact that Mary passed the Act for Regal Authority. I just love that. I love that she set that standard. And it was because she didn't look at her reign as a one-off. I mean, yes, Elizabeth was next, but I think had she had a daughter and only a daughter, she, would have propped that child up to be queen, and she would have expected the same reverence, the same, her to have the same authority. And so I think what's interesting about Mary, I do think it's a mistake to cast Mary and Elizabeth in a lens of sort of modern feminism. But I do think Mary did not believe that her reign was a glitch or a whoops or a one time. I think she truly saw there would be other times where England would be ruled by a woman.
Thank you so much for coming back, firstly,
Thank you.
Also telling us about your wonderful novels.
Oh, I'm so excited. I was so happy to be here.
Thank you for listening to Her Story. If there's a historical woman who inspires you and you'd like to share her story on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch at unholytudor@gmail.com. Until next time, keep celebrating the incredible women who've shaped our world.